Richmond, Virginia, rich in history and to some in culture as well, but one history until now hasn't quite been told. Soul music, R&B music, jazz music, even hip-hop music, all have deep roots in culture in Central Virginia. But we start to tell the story here, now.
In the standing room only played, it was time for them to come back on. Whatever song I was playing on the turntables, that band would pick it up and sound just like the turntable.
Yeah.
Oh, man,
This is the soul R&B radio legends of Central Virginia.
Oh, what's his name? Carol, what's his name? Dr. Disco. Soul. That's right.
No, he said half a pound of milk. So he said half a that high pitched voice.
And I don't know if he ever gets credit, but I think Kirby invented skating.
Kirby Carmichael, and this is the story I was going to tell.
While working at the Old Times Dispatch Radio and then on to WAMT 990 AM radio in the 1960s, Tiger Tom was the voice of the black community for years, and till this day has had a great impact on most, if not all, the disc jockeys and announcers you are about to see. We now let them tell the story.
The night programs were really the first real effort of the Negroes, as we were called then, to have radio programs. But actually, WMBG had some black quartets, colored quartets, Negro quartets, Afro-American quartets, whatever you want to call them. And A.D. Price was working on a station at the time with a fellow named Don Alvarado. Alvarado even might have had the first license in Richmond. But at the Colored Richmond is on the air, we had mainly gospel programs. The bright lights were shining. Of course, the Harmonizing Four, probably the greatest of the quartets of Richmond, they were broadcasting over WRNL, NL standing for News Leader. And then on Thursday night, you had various types of civic programs, letting them know what Bangor Center was doing, what the Lee Street Y was doing, what the Phillis Wheatley branch for the girls doing down on 7th Street, and what the great bands in town, like the Johnson Happy Pals. That was, they won the national contest for big bands up at, in New York in 1939. After the 3 years, the news leader people, that would be Brian, decided that they didn't want a colored developed station, or even, we also not only had the radio station programs, but we had the colored page in the Richmond Times-Dispatch itself, every day, and the whole page on Sunday. And Mr. Bryan went into his big bank account, $2 million, and bought the Times-Dispatch. WANT opened in 1951. And Mr. Richard Eaton, the owner, he came over to the Virginia Teachers Association and asked me to join the staff.
I got inspired getting into radio broadcasting by listening to the radio. You know, it seemed like the announcers on the air sound like they were having a ball. I'm from South Jersey, and being from South Jersey, I listened to Philadelphia radio. Top 40 was WIBG, was a big radio back then. Actually, they were 990 on the dial. Then, of course, the urban stations, or as we used to call them back then, they were the R&B stations, WDAS in Philadelphia, WHAT in Philadelphia. Of course, my favorite on WDAS was Jocko and his rocket ship show. Then, of course, over in Baltimore, I could pick up 1010 on the AM dial, which was WSID. And they had a disc jockey there, was my biggest inspiration in radio. Called himself Fat Daddy. Paul Johnson. This guy used to use words this long. And he talked very fast. And he was my idol, my mentor.
Kirby Carmichael, I got to tell it like it is, as August Moon says. Kirby Carmichael was actually, he and Willie Poe and the other WENZ people really were the ones that in a sense, took WANT out of the complete limelight. You know, we used to joke because we had all the advertising too, which is the heart of newspaper and radio. And they went over there, we are told, and gave all of the workers portable radios that didn't play anything but the other station. And but then later, Kirby came with us.
I started my career when I was a junior in high school, and at WWBZ in Vineland, New Jersey. After being on the air for a while, of course, once you become 18 at that time, you're eligible for the draft. And I woke up one morning and went to the mailbox, and there was this letter. Your friends and neighbors have selected you. So, hey, I had to go in the Army. So I did my time in the Army, and I came back, went back to WWBZ in Vineland. But there again, in a small town, you can quickly outgrow it. And I had pretty much reached my peak in my hometown area. And the manager of the radio station said, Kirby, it's time for you to go. Spread your wings. So he kind of pointed me in a direction and said, go. So I went to Baltimore, WSID. And after being in Baltimore, WSID, heard about Richmond, Virginia. So hey, on down 95 I came. First I came to WENZ 1450. Did all night for 2 weeks. Then I started doing afternoons over there. And it's a good crowd, good people that I work with. But the owner really didn't care about individuals. And it just got to a point where the staff was all unhappy. And eventually things started rolling around. So as they rolled around, I think I was pretty much the last one to jump off. And being without a job for a while, of course, after I came into this market, I used to do dances everywhere. So although I didn't have a job on the radio, I still had a lot of dances. You know, Petersburg, Dinwiddie County, Surrey County, Amelia County. I did dances in all the counties. But in order to, being I was not on air at ENZ, I had to advertise. So I bought advertising time on WANT. Then we talked in front of the post office. He said, come see me Monday. So I went to see Ben Miles over at WANT. We talked. And from that point on, it was WANT 990. I was back on the radio. Although the manager of the old radio station was calling me on the hotline every day, trying to get me to come back to ENZ. But hey, that wasn't going to happen.
He knows the business, a real radio man.
I listened to him. He was on WANT, and I listened to him when I was a young girl, and just enjoyed his presence on the air, the music he played. WANT was a old school love radio station. They played a lot of love music, so you know you loved WANT. Ben Miles was there, and of course Chocolate Chip, and oh man, Tom Mitchell, so many back then. Yeah, good days, good days. Now Kirby has remained a friend throughout my career and to this day, and it's great to have old school folk like that in the neighborhood, if you will.
The tall man of soul. I remember Kirby. When I was in high school at Armstrong, it was Armstrong Kennedy at the time, and he was always the grand marshal at the Armstrong Walker games. And he had that formula, what was that, white car, the formula, the earthquake funk machine, and he was, that, yeah, and he was always playing Rapper Dapper Snapper. I mean, it was like the ground was coming up, an earthquake.
We had to rip the seats out. Yeah, I remember that well.
No back seats.
You'd all heard about his car, right? He didn't have a back seat, it was all speakers. To an 18-year-old kid, that's living the dream, man. So Kirby Carmichael, for me, is the ultimate radio announcer, and still is.
Well, Kirby was the man, all the way around. I mean, he had earthquake funk machine. Now you can't, what else can you say behind that? Yeah, I mean, he had it, and he turned it up. He won't shy about turning it up.
Whenever we're out at the parades that were downtown Richmond, the Christmas parades, and you could always touch and talk to Kirby. And you can do that with Kirby to this day.
Kirby Carmichael. Kirby Carmichael is one of my best friends. We've been together for many years. I remember we did a show down at Virginia State University, And what's so funny about that was a guy back in those days called Captain Sky. In some way or another, people took it from the radio promotion that Captain Sky was going to fly in out of the sky and land at Virginia State. So when we got down there, man, you couldn't even get into the building. There was so many people there. And the funny part about it, we paid Captain Sky all that money, and man, the man never even showed.
I used to listen to a lot of different people. Kirby was probably the best radio salesman there ever was as far as selling products on remotes. Kirby was influential because he was so popular and he did things his own way.
I grew up in Richmond, and when I was coming up, there were kids who listened to rock and roll, and there were kids who listened to soul music, and there were all these other groups. I was in that soul music crowd. I was a saxophone player, played in a band. So we listened to WAMT and WENZ and Moon Man and Kirby and Tom and all the other guys. And that's what I grew up on. These guys were the guys who I wanted to be like. There was a small problem. I couldn't exactly be like them, and I sure couldn't be as talented and as good as Kirby. I mean, Kirby is the best. He's the benchmark. He's what everybody else was shooting for.
Wow, what do you say about Kirby Carmichael? The tall man of soul. That's how I describe him. I remember being at Highland Park Elementary School, and Kirby would be on the air, and he would have his theme song, Kirby Carmichael, the tall man of soul. And I'm like, I can't even remember what's on my test, but I know that song. But when I saw this guy, I was like, oh, he's a giant. So on Sunday nights, it was like, Kirby Carmichael is doing Skateland. Kirby Carmichael's doing Skateland. So you make sure you get your fresh jeans and your tops, because you've got to go to Skateland on Williamsburg Road to hang out with Kirby Carmichael. So, you know, when I got into the business, Kirby was like, I want you to remember the things that you loved about me in radio.
The flood of '72 from the hurricane presented a problem. The transmitter was on Bell Island with no power, and the bridge to the island was washed out. No transmitter, no station, nor commercials on the air, and no money being made.
There was a little one-lane raggedy bridge. Back in those days, WAMT's transmitter was on Bell Island in the middle of the James River, and you used to have to go over there on this little one-lane bridge. Hurricane Camille came through and, frankly, took out the bridge. So there was no access to the island.
We were all sitting around the office one day, and I realized, I said, hey, we can't play no commercials. We can't get paid. We got to get the station back on the air. So I suggested to management, hey, we get a helicopter. I had a buddy of mine, he's passed away now. A lot of folks will remember him. His name was Hopewell. And Hope, we flew him in every morning to sign the station on, to fire up the generator and put the station on the air. And that's how we got WAMT broadcasting with no electricity going to Belle Isle.
And then after a while, we found out that the city was not going to rebuild the bridge. And we started to use a boat to go back and forth, but that was also a big hassle because the transmitter was in the middle of the island on top of the hill. So once you got over there on the boat, you still had to walk and lug whatever tools you needed or whatever you needed to the transmitter site. And God forbid you forgot something and had to come back down and go back over. So it became a big hassle. So eventually the transmitter site was relocated off of Masonic Home Lane, off of 9 Mile Road.
Kirby Carmichael, really, nobody could compete with him in the afternoons.
There's a story that Kirby and I always share. And when I came to town and I was trying to get the job at WAMT in 1974, and I was on the air part-time at WENZ, Kirby always tells the story that I was sounding better as a part-timer at WENZ than all of their full-timers. So he hipped me to this opening at WSSV, a top 40 station in Petersburg. He said, King, I understand they got a full-time position open over in Petersburg. You're looking for a full-time job? Hey, go over there, see if you can get the job. I went over, I got the job. I was working midnight till 6. Once I hooked up with WAMT in 1975, about a year later, Kirby finally explained to me how I ended up in Petersburg. He said, King, if you really want to know what happened, he said, you were the best thing that they had over at ENZ, and I didn't want you to end up as my competitor in the afternoons at WENZ, so I sent you over to Petersburg. That's how you ended up in Petersburg. So that's a story that we love to share all the time. And he ended up being one of my very best friends in Richmond.
Corporate radio started cutting back overnight guys all across the country. Kirby was one of the last to go because, to be honest with you, the guy who was in charge at that time had been told long before that we don't have overnight guys anymore. But he was as big a fan of Kirby as everybody else. But, you know, it gets to a point where you can't put that off anymore. So when the time did come, and it was time, you know, and they made the move, it was kind of like realizing that a part of radio history had died at that point. If you can't have Kirby Carmichael, you know, if you can't make a place for somebody of that stature, then that's a big wound and a big void. I get it. I understood. I knew the reality of the situation. But at the same time, come on, it's Kirby Carmichael. It's a legend. It was very hard to take. You know, it's like a lot of situations in life. You look at part with your heart and part with your head. Your head understands it. Your heart don't get it.
It's a business. I understand that. But somehow, some way down the line, the human element has been lost. You know, you can listen at one station and hear the same format in any city in the country. You can hear a jam station anywhere you go, and all the stations are playing the same music. They got the same guy doing the drops. And it's just homogenized, and they've taken away the personality, the feeling. I mean, there'd be a time when if Kirby read the newspaper and somebody's house was burned out, he could call Ben Miles if Ben didn't call him first. He said, look, I want to do something, raise some money for them this afternoon. And bam, that afternoon, you're raising money for somebody who just lost their home and their kids need clothes. And by the end of the day, or by the end of the week, we had money for them, we had clothes and everything else. You can't do that now. And when they just, after all the years that Kirby put in, for them to just treat him like a dirty pair of underwear that you just threw in the washing machine and not even put in some detergent, you know, just throw him in. It's like, okay, bye. I mean, that's just heartless, man. It's just heartless.